going, would you like me to just do a halving joint, a cross halving joint?
Hi guys, and welcome to Southwest TAFE Building Department. We've got a video here with one of our teachers, Chris Holloway. He's going to show us how to do a cross halving joint. The first thing that you'll need to do is to make sure that you measure everything properly. If you can do the best work you like on any piece of work, but if you've measured it wrong, it's still going to be wrong. So check that you've got the right measurements first, and then using a tri-square or a combination square, which I think is what Chris has there in his hand, and a sharp pencil, you can mark out the lines for your joint that you're going to make. So in this case we're using 90 by 45 timber, and so our checkout is half of a 90 by 45. So you'd need to cut that out. So the next thing Chris is going to do here is going to finish marking this out. There's a number of different ways that you can mark the depth. First thing is to measure the depth so that we know how deep it's going to be. So that and this is a halving joint, as its name suggests, is half the thickness of the piece of timber. So what Chris is now using is a marking gauge, and this marking gauge enables you to put a line onto a piece of timber using a bit like a sharpened nail or a pinprick. And you'll notice too that he's pushing the marking gauge in at each end so that he doesn't run past the end of his joint. So he does that on one side, and then using a sharp pencil again marks the line in pencil. So now he's going to do the other side. The most important thing here is to remember to mark from the same side, so holding the stock of the marking gauge against the right side of the piece of timber. And away he goes again, puts his mark there, and usually one draw is all you need. If you do two or three, what you end up is about 3 different lines, and it makes it much harder to work to that line. So you want one line marked with a pencil, and also marking the waist as he does it there, so you can actually mark out the waist part. So he's going to mark the second bit now. We might speed this a little bit up, eh? Righto, so we're up to the cutting out. If you'll notice here just how Chris has got his hands placed regarding the saw. You'll see he's pointing his finger down the line of the saw and cutting in a straight motion. Remember, you can only cut what you can see, and the other things to remember too is to make sure that you're cutting on the waist side of your lines. The waist side is the bit you don't want, so in this case it's the inside of the joint where Chris marked earlier. So make sure that you are cutting on the waist side of your line. Get down to the bottom. Now remember, don't cut too far because you don't want to cut past your markings. So if you cut too much out, then the joint's going to be wrong, isn't it? So make sure you only cut down to the line. So you're cutting the other side of the joint out now. Get down to the line and then stop. Better a little bit too little than too much. Another thing is try not to cut in an arc like a big hump in the middle. Try and cut square through the timber. And now Chris is putting a couple of relief cuts in as well. This is going to help when he starts to chisel the joint out by cutting the relief cuts in the middle of the piece that's coming out. It's just going to make it that much easier later to chisel out. And if you'll notice when he starts chiseling that this piece of timber has actually got a big knot in the middle of it, and the knot is much harder timber than the rest around it, so it's going to be harder to chisel out. So having the relief cuts in the bit of timber just makes it that bit easier. There you go, he's finished, just about finished cutting the cuts that he needs to do. Righto, now we're up to chiselling out the joint. And the most important part about chiselling is you need 2 hands to do the job properly. So what Chris is doing here is using a clamp to clamp the piece of timber onto the saw stool, because if you didn't clamp it down you'd be chasing it all over the place. So clamp it down and then using your chisel to chisel out the waste that you don't need. Don't try and go right to your line to start with. Just start a little bit away from your line and take the bulk out first, and that's going to give you a much better finish of your joint. If you're listening, you can hear the tap tap tap, not bash bash bash. The secret again to good joints is just to take a little bit at a time and take it nice and slow, and you'll get a cleaner finish. Also, sharp tools are help, so make sure that you're using a sharp chisel. So he's turned it over, coming from the other side. So just another tip, don't chisel all the way through from one side, because you're more likely to break out the other side of the piece of timber. Notice too that Chris is holding the chisel firmly as he's doing the job, so you want to have control. The most important thing when doing any handmade timber joints is the control that you have of the tools you're using. So if you're holding them a bit limp-handedly or not quite got hold of them properly, you're going to find that it's much more difficult. Again, clamp down to the stool. Now, it's always hard on a stool because the stool's going to want to move here, so you might need to stick your knee on it or something like that. So again, holding the chisel flat in the bottom of the joint. It's a case of just chiselling out till we've got a nice flat base in our piece of timber. One of the areas to protect are the shoulders of the joint, and if you can help to protect those, and that is the sharper edges along the top of the joint, that's what you're going to see when the joint's finished. So it's very important not to damage those parts of the joint. So now chiselling on the flat, again coming in from both sides to make sure that you're doing it correctly. You want it nice and flat and nice and clean. The cleaner the joint is, the better it'll glue together, and the better it'll hold together over time. So again, just notice that Chris is using two hands on the chisel. He's put his hand there next to it. One of the things to be really careful of is where are your hands at all times. Where are your hands when you're using a chisel? So putting your hands onto both hands on the chisel is always going to be much safer than trying to put your hand alongside of it. So you can use the edge of the chisel to check if the bottom is flat. So once you've completed both parts, we've only done one obviously for this demonstration, your piece of timber should fit neatly into the slot. And there you have it. That's the end of our video. Cheers, guys.